Being a slave in colonial times was harsh. Slaves were mostly treated with no respect and treated very badly in general. They were not seen as people, but instead as property. Slaves lived in compact quarters. The slave houses were often set close to each other, and each family would live in one cabin together. If generous, the owner would have the cabins around 15 by 20 feet. Almost all the slaves in their family lived in these cabins. Only house slaves who worked in the owner's house could live with their masters. This kind of cruel treatment eventually led to different kinds of slave resistance. One way was to have a slave revolt. Slave revolts were risky because sometimes one of the house slaves might tell the owner about the plan, thereby ruining it and getting the slaves into severe trouble. In fact, none of the major slave revolts were successful. All of their leaders were killed and their followers punished. Another way for resisting was running away. This type of resistance was used most, especially during the time of the Underground Railroad. It was impossible to know how many slaves actually ran away, because no exact count was ever made. Some historians contend that up to 50,000 blacks ran away each year of slavery, especially from 1830 to 1860. One successful story was about Harriet Jacobs. She lived most of her life in Edenton, North Carolina as a slave. Her first owner was a woman who taught her how to read and write. Sadly, the woman died and Harriet was willed to the 3-year-old child of her owner's brother. The child's father tried to force her to become his mistress, but she refused the offer. She had 2 children with a relationship with another white man, a lawyer. She was sent to the family's plantation as a punishment for refusing his attentions. She ran away in 1835. Over the course of several years, she found her way to the north, where she met Frederick Douglass and became an active abolitionist. And in 1861, her autobiography was published. These were her words when she saw slaves being sold at a local auction block.
On one of these sale days, I saw a mother lead 7 children to the auction block. She knew that some of them would be taken from her, but they took all. The children were sold to a slave trader, and their mother was bought by a man in her own town. Before night, her children were all far away. She begged the trader to tell her where he intended to take them. This he refused to do. How could he, when he knew he would sell them, one by one, wherever he could command the highest price? She wrung her hands in anguish and exclaimed, "Gone, all gone. Why doesn't God kill me?"
Slave owners did not like the fact that slaves were running away. To them, slaves were valuable property. The healthy, young, and able slaves would sell for about $1,000 at an auction. Owners would pay big sums of money to bring back runaway slaves. In fact, Georgia's 1755 statutes, her pattern after South Carolina's, actually encouraged the killing of adult male runaways. The reward for returning a dead male slave was twice the amount offered for returning a live woman or child. One method of bringing back a runaway slave was to pay a slave catcher. These slave catchers would hunt down runaway slaves for profession, and would get paid for each catch they make. Catchers would use bloodhounds to trace the runaway slave tracks. Although those kinds of slavery ended a long time ago, there are other types of slavery that still exist now. Slavery in the form of forced labor, child labor, or debt bondage. People are tricked into thinking that they will get better jobs and a good day's pay, but they are dropped off at some factory doing hard work all day long for the rest of their life. Despite all this, there are some that stepped up and helped these people, and maybe, with help from people like us, many lives can be saved from slavery and the cycle of poverty.